Okay, let's look at our first example. It says calculate the simple interest. So they want the simple interest, and we know the simple interest to be I. Earned on a 1 year. 1 year tells me the time is 1 year. T equals 1. And it is in annual, so we got to make sure our interest rate is annual. On a deposit of $1,000, that $1,000 right there should be our P value. That's our initial investment, our principal. And then we have an interest rate of 5%, so that tells me that R is 0.05. Okay? This is what I mean by identifying your variables. Read the sentence, go through it, and decide what each one of those things want. Okay? So some people like circling it in line like I've done right there. Others like writing it over to the side. As long as you do one of these two methods where you either circle it within the problem itself, or if you write it on the side, I'm perfectly fine with that. You do not have to do both. So what I like to do is I circle it within the line and say what it is. So again, other organized students like writing it on the side. Pick one or the other, okay? So if I wrote it on the side, I would have written that P equals 1,000, R equals 0.05, T equals 1. I want just notice that this is year. It doesn't say what the interest rate is, so we know that's yearly. So we know that's in terms of years. So those two match. So there we go. We've identified the variables. Now let's identify the formula. The formula we're going to be using is the simple interest formula. We know that because it says calculate the simple interest. And the simple interest formula is I equals PRT. So we've identified the variables. We've written the formula. That's steps 1 and 2. Step 3 is plug those in. Okay? So let's plug in the numbers. P was 1,000. R was 0.05, and T was 1. So now what do? I've identified the variables, I've identified the formula, I've plugged in the numbers. Now I just use my calculator and get the answer. In your calculator, plug in 1,000 times 0.05 times 1, and let's see what you get. I'm getting an amount of 50. What does this stand for? This stands for $50. So my final answer on the problem would be $50. Okay, let's move on to example 2. It says calculate the simple interest earned in 1 year on a deposit of $500 if the interest rate is 4%. So let's go through. Again, it says simple interest, so I know they want to calculate I. Earned in 1 year, so that tells me that my time is 1 year. A deposit of $500, so that's my principal is $500. And then an interest rate of 4%. Again, we have to assume it's annual because it doesn't say. So our time is annual, our interest is annual. Those match. We can use the formula. And this would be R equals 0.04. 4% written as a decimal is 0.04. Remember, just move your decimal place to the left twice. Or if you want, take that number, divide it by 100. Or even put 4%, enter into your calculator, and it'll give you that same amount right there. We have now identified the variables. That's step 1, right? So step 2 would be write out the formula. The formula I'm using is I equals PRT. The third step is fill in the numbers. P here was 500. R was 0.04. And T was 1. And then the fourth step is just calculate it out. See what you get. 500 times 0.04 times 1 is 20, and that's in terms of dollars. So the amount of interest you would get after 1 year would be $20 worth of interest on this account. Okay, let's take a step back. What we didn't do for these two problems is step 5. Let's think about reasonableness. How much interest would you get after a year? Well, notice we did get a positive value. It's not negative, so that's reasonable. And it's not too much interest. It's not ridiculous. On $1,000, I made 50. On $500, I made 20. So those numbers seem reasonable to me, okay? So if you want graded on the test, I have to see all 5 of these steps. I have to see the first step being the variables are identified. Second step is you've written down the formula. Third step is you plug it in. Fourth step is you get an answer. What I see all the time is students on the test just try to do steps 3 and 4. If you don't do steps 1 and 2, I cannot give you credit. So make sure that you do steps 1 and 2 on the test. Let's continue on. Number 3, Calculate the simple interest due on a 3-month loan of $2,000 if the interest rate is 6.5%. Okay, so let's go through this real quick. Here I have t equals 3. That's my time. I have P equals 2,000. That's my initial investment. And I have R equals 0.065. That's my interest rate. It's simple interest. They want the simple interest, so they don't know what I is. So now I've identified my different things here, my variables. And I write down, that's step 1, right? Step 2 would be write down that formula. So that's I equals PRT. Step 3 would be plug in those numbers. So that would be I equals 2,000 times R, which is 0.065, times T, which is 3. Go ahead and see what you get. Plug it into your calculator now and let's see what you get. And if this is what you plugged in, this is completely wrong. Absolutely wrong on this problem. Why is this wrong? What did I emphasize when you looked at the formula I equals PRT? When you do I equals PRT, you need the time and the rate to be the same thing. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go back a few steps. I equals PRT is perfectly fine. We're going to be using that formula, but I'm telling you what we did wrong is we identified a couple of the things wrong. Okay? What did we identify wrong? We identified in particular T wrong. And I want to emphasize that this is month, and this the time is measured in months, and this is measured in years. So I'm just going to write a little note. Time and rate don't match. So what happens when your time and rate don't match? Well, here's what happens. We can't say that t equals 3 in this case. We can't say that t equals 3 in this case. We have to change that in terms of years. So what is month in terms of years? Well, if you need to think about this, let me do it in green over here. If I have 3 months, and I know that 12 months are in 1 year, that means I would have 3 over 12ths, 3/12ths of a year. Now you could simplify that fraction, but there's no need. We're plugging it into our calculator anyways. So the time here would have to be 3/12ths. 3 months is 3/12ths of a year. So change your time in terms of year and now redo the problem. I equals PRT, P is 2,000, R is 0.065, which is your annual interest rate. Time is 3/12ths, which is your length of terms in annual or years, right? Okay. Now plug that into your calculator and let's see what you get. When I do this, I get $32.50. Way different than what I would have gotten before if I used t equals 3. When I use t equals 3, I'm saying I had this investment for 3 years. There's a huge difference between having an investment for 3 months and 3 years, so be careful with that. That might help you. Go ahead and look at example 4 now. It says calculate the simple interest due on a 4-month loan of $1,500 if the interest rate is 5.25%. Again here, our percent is always, unless otherwise stated in terms of years. Since this is 4 months, 4 months is the same thing as 4/12ths of a year. Okay? And that's what we're going to be using for t because we need those to match. Okay? So t is going to be 4/12ths. Your P value here is the initial investment of $1,500. Your R value here, your rate is 0.0525. Again, divide that number by 100 or move the decimal to the left twice or just put it into your calculator with the percentage button to get that decimal. And it still wants to know what I is. What's that simple interest? So that's step 1. I've now identified my variables. I, we don't know. T is 4/12ths because it has to be in terms of years. P is 1,500. and R is 0.0525. Step 2, again, always write down that formula. So we have I equals PRT. Yes, you do need to write down the formula, every single problem. Step 3, plug in the numbers. So P was 1500, R was 0.0525, and T was 4/12. Plug that into your calculator, it gives you step 4. Plugging that into the calculator, I'm getting an amount of about $26.25. $26.25. Okay, let's go ahead and look at example 5 here. I want you to notice that if you look at the solutions, there was a typo in the solutions. And depending on which lecture notes you printed, you might have a typo in your lecture notes as well. So just make sure that your problem reads the exact same as mine does on example 5. It says, can't calculate the simple interest due on a 2-month loan of $500 if the interest rate is 1.5% per month. This problem's different. I want you to be really careful on this again. I'm going to read it again. Calculate the simple interest on a 2-month loan. So this is in terms of months. I want to just emphasize that it's in terms of months of $500 if the interest rate is 1.5% per month. So what do you notice about R and T now? Do we need to make T equal to 2/12? Well, the only reason we made T equal to 4/12 and 3/12 in the previous problem was because our interest rate was in terms of years and our time was in terms of months. Those two things didn't match. But notice in this problem, we have our time in months and we have our interest rate in months. Those two numbers match. So we don't need to say 2 months is 2/12. In fact, it would be wrong if we did, because it would turn it into yearly. And we don't want yearly, we want monthly. So because they match, we use just the numbers as is. In other words, here we're going to use T equals 2, standing for 2 months. Our P is our initial investment rate, that's the $500. And then our R is going to be 0.015. Again, that is monthly interest. So again, the rate and the time match. They want to know what simple interest is, so we don't know what I is. That's step 1. Step 2 would be what's the formula we're using? We're using the formula I equals PRT. Step 3 would be, let's plug in those numbers. So that would be I equals, well, P is the initial investment, $500. R, the monthly interest rate, which is 0.015. Time, T, the amount of time in months, was 2 months. So go ahead and plug that in and let's see what you get. I'm getting a value of 15, which means our answer is $15. Again, I'm not emphasizing step 5, but I should. Are all of these numbers reasonable? They're not too large. They're not more than the initial investment. They seem reasonable for the amount of interest there is.